Afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is today's episode of the California Proprietarian Podcast, or CAPropCast for short, as we like to call it, where we discuss issues that are related to the defense of private property rights, which are granted to us by God from birth. So we discuss all sorts of issues in this country that on a daily basis threaten in some way, shape, or form the private property rights of its people. And today I have on Miss Bonnie Wallace, who is here to specialize on a talk about some of the threats to our children in our wider culture wars today, especially as they occur often in our public schools, even down to the elementary school level, which is particularly horrifying. So I'd like to take this moment to turn it over to Bonnie real quick to introduce herself, and she can give you her background, and then we'll dive into the meat of the issue, as we always do.
Thank you, Philip. Nice to be here.
Absolutely. Pleasure to have you.
You met me in our meeting, the Greater Pasadena Republican Assembly,
Yes.
which I've started a few years ago, to bring together Republicans and conservative thought. I feel like it's really important. But in addition to that, speaking about the children, I did homeschool my kids here in Los Angeles, actually the Pasadena area, from kinder through middle school. So I'm aware even then, and this was years ago because now they're in college, it wasn't quite as bad. The schools were not quite as bad, but I knew they were indoctrinating the children with Marxist ideology, and I knew I didn't want that. So I didn't put them in school. We homeschooled through the whole thing just so I wanted to give them a rich education and a safe education, a safe place. So I did that, and they thrived. Now they're in college. They got into the college of their choice. They're
Excellent.
doing well. When they did go to high school, I couldn't keep them home. They were on honor roll, and they got great grades, and they made wonderful friends, and they were really involved in the different activities. So it all worked out. A lot of homeschooling opportunities in Los Angeles. Parents can do it.
Excellent. I'm
and
so
it's
glad.
Important. It's
Yes.
so important.
Yes, it is, and it's a tremendous relief to hear that in particular, especially, as you mentioned, the horrific level of the threat that confronts our kids and confronts parents, mostly in public schools today, but also, unfortunately, in a lot of private schools, including elite private schools. To dive into some of those issues that have hit the headlines a lot recently in the past couple of years, and especially in the last few months, we've seen plenty of examples where there are books in elementary school libraries that are readily available to kids, and in some cases are even being actively taught to them, that not only attempt to indoctrinate them with a cultural Marxist ideology that's designed to subvert and undermine and destroy the nuclear family unit, but they also contain literally explicit pornographic images. They contain images of often minors performing sexual acts on one another.
It's really incredible.
Supposedly to increase LGBTQ acceptance and inclusion. And while, of course, we never want any child who's experiencing gender dysphoria or who is experiencing a particular sexual orientation, we never want them to, feel bad or feel like they're dirty or a bad person because they experience that. The way you welcome those kids and the way you treat them properly is not to expose them to sexually inappropriate material, because that's not suitable for any child.
No.
Regardless of orientation.
Not. Exactly. I agree.
And to think that for bringing up that what should be a common sense point, that we're often called domestic terrorists, we're called a domestic terror threat for bringing up that obvious point, it's particularly chilling.
Well, I just read an article that Joe Biden's
Joe Biden.
Dr. Joe Biden. She calls the parents that want to take these books out, we're book banning.
Book banning, right.
And we're Nazis.
Fascists.
She uses that word.
Yes.
She literally used the word Nazi for trying to ban these books. They make it sound like we're book banning. We're putting them in the fire in the middle of the square.
Right. Which, perhaps that wouldn't be such a bad idea with some of these books.
Particular books.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And the thing is the vast majority of the parents, like, for example, Moms for Liberty, that are rightfully attempting to have these books removed from schools where minors are being exposed to them. We're not saying that adults don't have a right in private to look at what they want to look at as long as it's legal. That's not what any of us are saying, or hardly any of us.
No.
What we're saying is that it is already a crime. It is already a serious crime in every jurisdiction in this country to deliberately show pornography to a child.
Children.
That is already a highly illegal act.
Yeah.
And so this really shouldn't be much of a stretch, for, us to remove these books from our shelves. I mean, when I was in elementary school, we were reading books that some of them did occasionally touch on topics that were a little bit mature. Like, I can remember a couple that might have, dealt with a little bit of domestic violence or made allusions to it, but I never encountered any that had explicit pornography in them, and it's very disturbing that those would be in our elementary schools today. And I salute Moms for Liberty.
Well, there's also the drag queen story hour where you've got these men dressed, I don't know, I guess they're dressed as women, but in such caricature. I mean, I'm a woman, and I'm, a woman.
Right.
But I don't, I don't care.
No.
These men, with the way they dress, is so over the top.
It is.
And with the G-strings and the fishnets and the heels like this and the makeup and the hair in front of children.
Well, it's an adult. Drag was always understood until very recently as being exclusively an adult sexual performance. There would be drag shows, and you had to be at least 18 to go. They would check IDs. Like they might have a drag show at a strip club or at, a comedy club that was for adults, or maybe a playhouse. And it was understood to be comedic, but adult comedy.
Right.
Or, in some cases it might be understood to be purely, designed to appeal to the prurient interest, but it was only for adults.
Adults, yeah,
and
that's
so
fine.
Now we're seeing this melding of the world that is for adults,
for
with
little kids.
the world that's for very small children. It would be akin to taking a child to a strip club.
Exactly.
It would.
Yeah, right. And unfortunately, parents are doing that.
Yeah, I
you
know.
see the parents on the floor with the children in their lap. And the guy is dancing lewdly.
It's child abuse.
It's really odd.
Yeah,
it's disturbing and odd.
I mean, I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen them too, I've seen a few different videos of some of these drag queens, or in some cases it'll be an actual female stripper, but still that's almost as disturbing. They will be twerking into a kid's face.
Yeah, twerking. Right.
It's... This is borderline child molestation.
They split. They do the splits and everything. And the kids are looking at it like, "What is this?" And the parents are like, "Yeah, look, baby, look."
Yeah, it's
shocking.
It's pure insanity. It really.
And is it to be inclusive, to be open, to be accepting?
Right, it's
what
funny.
What is that?
Because
it's weird.
When I was a little kid, the way my parents taught me to be inclusive is they always said if somebody's different, or as I became older and I could understand what it was, they would tell me, if somebody's gay, you don't mistreat them, you don't bully them,
you treat them,
you don't harass them, you
like
treat
everybody
them,
else.
Yeah, you treat them like everybody else with kindness and respect.
Right.
That was what they told me. That's how you teach kids acceptance. You don't teach them acceptance by taking them to a sexual performance.
It's called the golden rule. You do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Period.
Yes. And absolutely.
Despite what they look like or act like or sound like or whatnot.
That's right. And, my parents also taught me, they said, obviously, I was raised in the church. They said, obviously, we have theological and moral disagreements with homosexual behavior, but that's not a reason ever to be mean to a gay person.
Sure.
They say you never do that. And so I feel like I was raised in a very tolerant home. So it's very clear that what is being taught to kids now, it's designed to inculcate them with sexual behaviors or sexual proclivities that will subvert what is necessary to form a healthy, stable nuclear family.
Yes,
that will
100%.
make them unable to have a normal marriage, unable to raise children in a healthy, stable manner. And we know what happens to a civilization when a critical mass of people become unable or unwilling to raise stable families with the right values. And
yeah, I'm going to say something now that might be a little bit off color, but I saw, I think it was a video or I read an article where middle school teachers are having a really hard time getting the kids to focus because they're petting each other.
Yes. Are you talking about the furries or?
No, well, no, I'm not talking about the furries. I'm
Okay.
talking about because they're reading this explicit content, and it is
Yes.
exciting for the
Yeah.
kids. They're getting
Right.
aroused.
Yeah, that's
And
very
they're
disturbing.
acting out in the classroom, and the teachers are saying, I'm having a really hard time getting them to focus because they're aroused.
Right. That's
I mean, it's so sick. And then on top of it all, guys can go into the girls' bathroom, and
Right.
God knows what's going to go on.
That's dangerous.
It's very dangerous.
So,
Especially after they're kind of aroused from the
yeah.
book that they just were read to.
Well, it's
I mean,
incredible.
it's incredible. It's incredible that this is happening.
And it's especially appalling to me that we're hearing from these people that claim to be feminists. They claim to
Right.
be ideologically descended from the suffragettes, for example.
Right.
And they are telling us that women should be expected to put up with being in one of their locker rooms, being in one of
there's
their...
no safe space for women.
And they are seeing
they
a
have to
man come in
compete.
there,
Yeah.
right, with fully intact male genitalia that, he's showing around, and, they're expected to be okay with this. And if they're not okay with it, then they're the problem. That's particularly outrageous.
And I think Biden just eliminated Title IX. They just he didn't eliminate. He allowed the trans into the Title IX. That's what it. Yes,
he expanded it.
He expanded Title IX. Yes. So now the boys can compete with the girls on the same team, or whatnot, and in the same locker room.
And furthermore, his expansion to Title IX, it is worded in such a way to make it so that if you're a student or a staff member or a faculty member at any of these universities, that's public or private, that's covered by Title IX and receives federal tax dollars, if you refuse to address someone by their preferred gender pronouns, then you could end up being in serious trouble. You could be expelled. You could lose tenure. You could be fired.
It's forced speech.
It's an attempt from the D.C. bureaucracy to compel speech.
Compelled speech. Centralized compelled speech. Centralized control. Horrible.
Yes,
Couldn't be worse.
It is. And, perhaps that was the goal of centralizing, federal control over education to begin with.
Yeah, the Common Core
right.
of agenda.
And the Civil Rights Act and so on and so forth. And on top of that, too, under the Trump administration, this is one of the things Trump did that I really liked. He restored some degree of due process to the tribunals that would go on at these Title IX covered institutions to ensure that if someone was accused of sexual harassment or sexual assault, they would receive proper due process before disciplinary action was taken. What Biden has just done with his expansion to Title IX is he has made it so that people cannot cross-examine their accusers. Often they're not even informed who their accuser was.
Right.
And whether or not they are deemed guilty, is solely at the discretion of a campus bureaucrat who is probably a cultural Marxist ideologue, who's probably very left-wing. And this is especially dangerous for straight men. But in some cases, it could also be dangerous to other categories of people too.
Women, especially.
Yes, yeah. I mean, people could have their entire educational career derailed because somebody leveled a totally false, spurious accusation against them. They could say that they touched him
and that's
when they
been
didn't.
happening a lot, even prior to this. The whole Me Too movement, in a way. I mean, and we see what's happening with Trump with the Stormy Daniels and the hush money.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of that has been going on. But
And E. Jean Carroll.
Yeah, exactly. Who accused him of doing something 30 years ago, 25 years ago? Was it then?
In the 80s, yeah.
She doesn't even remember exactly when it happened.
And there's no evidence that the two have even met.
Right.
There's no evidence that they ever even met, much less.
Yeah, right. In the department store. In New York City, like nobody would recognize Trump walking into the department store.
Yes, that's right.
Like everybody would recognize Trump at that time in New York. He owned the city.
That's right.
You would see him walking in. You would watch him going into the dressing room.
And she claims that he came in, that they talked, and then he forced her into a dressing room.
Yeah, right.
And groped her and sexually assaulted her in a crowded department store.
And it's not right in New York City, where he's well known.
Yes.
And it's not the first time she's accused a man of this either. I guess this is not the first time that this accusation.
And
she's nuts.
I question her mental health because I've seen her on Anderson Cooper's show, and her behavior was very strange.
Very strange.
It was very odd.
She was talking about how rape is kind of a romantic thing.
Yes.
Or something like,
So she's simultaneously, crying that she's a rape victim, and yet out of the other side of her mouth, she's indicating a some sort of sexual fetish desire to be raped.
Right.
And so this is all incredibly strange behavior.
And we know a left-wing activist funded her to sue Trump.
Mm-hmm.
So
was it Soros? I'm just curious.
No, Reed. Somebody.
Is he like a billionaire or something?
Yeah, he's like a billionaire. He spends a lot of money on the leftist politicians.
He donates to Democratic candidates.
I think Reed is his last name. I don't remember his first name, or maybe
Yeah, well, that does make perfect sense.
I should look that up before I say that, but yeah.
And of course, we know that these leftist billionaires, they often donate to the teachers' unions.
Absolutely,
that are often responsible for promoting some of the material that we talked about before, the very sexually inappropriate material.
And the worst thing is, I believe our tax dollars are going to the teachers' unions too. So in a lot of ways, Americans are paying for this indoctrination and this child abuse in schools. It's incredible.
They are. These every time you file and pay your taxes, some of in a state like California at least, some of those tax dollars are going to stock the shelves with these incredibly inappropriate books and pay the salaries and benefits of teachers that are teaching them this material. I mean, I've seen the titles of some of these books. Like there's a book, it's often found in elementary schools. I think it's called was it called Being Gay?
Okay.
And it's not, as the title might suggest, it's not just about, teaching gay kids that God loves them too, and that they shouldn't feel bad about how they feel. But it's there's material in there that refers to sexual activity.
Yeah.
Sure. So I mean, not to get too graphic here, but I've seen some of these books where they show graphic depictions of oral sex, between two boys or between two men, and to say that not wanting young children to be exposed to that is fascist. I mean,
that's what they call you. They call you fascist because you don't want them to. That
really is it's awfully rich, and it's thank God in a lot of right-wing states, laws have been passed at the state legislatures that prohibit a lot of this, which I'm very relieved about. But unfortunately, here in California, what were you saying was the only viable option here in California? If you could go into that.
Homeschooling is a viable option. Mm-hmm. But the worst thing is, all this is happening in the public schools and in the private schools too. Mm-hmm. And how does California rank in terms of public school education? What are we at, the 48 out of 50?
Almost the worst.
Almost the worst.
Yes.
So our kids can't write, they can't read, they can't do math, they don't know some basic, history stuff. But they know about gay and trans and oral sex and all
gender
of that.
Ideology.
Their gender ideology. That's really super important.
They might not be able to divide 76 by 2,
right?
But or by 4, but they do know that there's 76 genders,
right? Exactly.
So according to what was it, Princeton University, the sociologists over there that said, did they say 76 or was it 174 genders that they said? I can't remember.
Yeah, right.
So it's and it seems to me too that this whole concept of gender, because my understanding of gender had always been that it was completely synonymous with biological sex, of which there can only be male and female.
I thought it was synonymous with chromosomes. You're either XX or XY, which I guess is biological sex.
Which are the biological determinants of sex. But, what I've been hearing in the last few years, ever since maybe 2019, about is that gender is entirely socially constructed. And it does make me wonder if the term and the concept of gender was invented deliberately by the cultural Marxists to subvert the family, which is why in my
100%.
Personal life, I've actually reverted to, only using the term sex to refer to men and women and male and female. I don't use the term gender anymore because I'm starting to think it's an inherently ideological term. I don't know if you feel the same way, but...
Well, that's interesting. You have to think about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's because the communists, especially ever since Antonio Gramsci founded the Frankfurt School, which eventually evolved into cultural Marxism, they've understood that to impose communism or to impose their ideology, they need to destroy traditional religion, faith,
Yep.
and the traditional family. They've understood that they need to destroy those because they compete with the state for allegiance. So and they
That's
want
right.
a totalizing state.
Well, they want to be God.
Right. And so the exact instrument by means they attempt to accomplish that, it changes over time. Sometimes they'll use race, other times they'll use class or ethnicity,
And
things
now
like
they're
that.
using gender or sex.
They use the concept of gender, which, I'm thinking that the concept of gender may be entirely made up.
I don't know. It might be, but sex, of course, could be a verb or a noun. So
Right. Yes.
gender is more of like a adjective or a noun. So I don't know if it was always made up with this in mind. That's an interesting idea, though. I mean, I think I would imagine that initially it was pretty innocuous. I mean, you're either male or female. That's your gender. Instead of saying
Right.
sex, because sex is kind of a loaded word.
It is, yeah, and it's there might be context where it's not
Appropriate
it's not
to say it.
the ideal word. I mean, you always one way that you know somebody's going to be profoundly insufferable is that when they introduce themselves with their preferred pronouns.
Yeah,
that's how you know
No,
you're dealing with a lunatic.
Exactly.
So you can know that right off the bat. It instantly marks them, which I guess maybe we should be grateful for that.
That they tell us, right? They've got it. Exactly.
They tell us up front, but what's particularly, while we might find that comedic and humorous in a lot of contexts, where it's not funny is when you have a situation where in these elementary and middle schools, especially in high schools too, if a student, and they're often encouraged by teachers and counselors, they sometimes don't arrive at that conclusion themselves.
Right.
They want to go by certain preferred pronouns that don't match their biological sex, on their birth certificate. And what the school will do is they will address them by those pronouns and then not inform the parents.
Exactly.
Of what's
true.
going on. And that to me, not only is it sexually inappropriate, but in extreme cases, it could lead to instances of sexual abuse by predatory adults, because now they have this secret going on,
Right.
to which
There's
the
a
parents are
secret.
not privy.
Yep.
So it can, if it's not already a form of grooming, it can rapidly evolve
Sure.
into a form of grooming if they're interacting with the wrong adult.
And I have heard they keep two lists at school, the
Mm-hmm.
official, outer list, so when you talk to the parents, but then the internal list, which can change the pronoun and the names and how these kids identify. But when
Mm-hmm.
you're talking to the parents, you use this list.
Yes. Yeah,
So
that's
they really do have it all worked out so that they don't get caught.
right.
So it's very secretive. It's all planned.
And what I always love that you hear is, the people on the left will often say, well, we have to do that because there's a danger that if the parents know, they might abuse the kid.
Right.
Or, they might hurt the kid, or they might not
And
be
the kid will
tolerant.
commit suicide if they don't,
The
they're
problem-
not affirmed.
That's right. The problem with that argument is that anytime teachers or counselors or school personnel suspect that there's abuse going on, they're required to inform law enforcement.
True.
If they believe that
That's
a
a good
child is
point.
being abused or is likely to be abused,
That's a really good
they
point.
they must inform law enforcement
That's
and,
right.
and make a report. So what we're being told is that they have reason to suspect abuse, yet they're not going to inform police or law enforcement or child protective services.
That's a good
But what
point.
they are going to do is have the secret between them and the kid,
Right.
to which the parents are not privy. If I was in their position and I suspected a child was being abused, immediately I'd be filing a police report.
Right.
Instantly.
Of course,
Because
yeah.
that's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So regardless of whether a kid says they're trans or says they're gay, that doesn't matter. What matters is
Right.
there's a kid in danger.
Be in danger, exactly.
So for them to use that argument, it's really insidious, and I think it's indicative of how broadly disingenuous they are
right.
with all of this. Because if they were
100%. Yeah.
it shows,
It's an
it demonstrates
excuse.
that of all the things they're concerned with, the safety and the well-being of the child is not one of them.
Not one of them.
So
exactly.
That.
And
Yeah.
it used to be the case, if a kid was anorexic or something,
Yes.
you would tell the parents.
Or bulimic,
Or
yeah,
bulimic
yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
You might say, your daughter, your son is having, or they're cutting themselves or something.
Yes.
You would hurt, you would tell the parents.
Yes.
But they're keeping this a secret. So there's definitely agenda behind it. No question about it.
You're supposed to inform the parents if their grades have slipped.
Right.
You're supposed to inform them if they're, consistently tardy.
Right.
Or
Yes.
also if they're truant.
Right.
But you don't inform them when the kid is supposedly saying that, they're the opposite gender. So
no,
that
it's a ploy to destroy the family, to destroy the future of our country.
And even in many cases where the kid supposedly says that, they're under the influence. They were influenced to do it by ideologically motivated teachers and counselors. And studies have shown that I think in around half of these cases, if not even more, in some cases, the child is autistic. So they're taking autistic children who are particularly prone and vulnerable during puberty. They're often very prone to suggestion, and they're often already depressed. Many of these kids have depression, and they're taking advantage of that, which is really evil. That's especially evil, to take an autistic, depressed child and say, what's wrong with you is that you were born in the wrong body.
Exactly.
That in and of itself should be a crime. That's a form of abuse. So
yeah, it's so sad. The other day I was walking in Pasadena, and this sweet girl, she must have been like 8 or 9 years old. She was in a wheelchair. She didn't have legs. Her fingers were like this, like she had 1, 2, 3 fingers. Beautiful face. Her torso looked good. Her arms were maybe a little bit small for her body, but she had no legs. And her mother was strolling her. Beautiful little girl. And I just thought, like she's deformed. She was born this way. She was born deformed.
Birth defect,
and you might want to, put a prosthesis or get an operation or something. But these kids in school are perfectly normal.
Yes.
They have perfectly normal bodies.
Right, healthy bodies.
Healthy bodies.
Yeah.
And they want to destroy them.
Right. Well, it's kind of like...
And I don't understand, why would you want to destroy a perfect, when you do have children who have physical ailment, they were, it's so sad to see that.
It is, yeah.
But I mean, it's kind of weird that we would want to destroy a perfectly healthy body. I understand if somebody doesn't have an arm and they want to get a prosthesis, or if they need to get, if they have the cleft palate and they want to get an operation to fix that or whatever.
Well, because that's a medical problem.
It's a medical problem. Or even if it's just a physical problem, you just don't want to have your nose over here. You want to move it over here. I mean, okay, fine,
Right.
But to like cut things off that are perfectly normal and healthy to fit some kind of agenda or norm or to be accepted or something is just, it's ludicrous.
Most doctors won't even do that for adults. If you go as an adult, if you go to a regular doctor and say, hey, doctor, there's nothing wrong with my arm, but I really feel like being an amputee and I'd like you to do a surgery to cut it off, they're going to say no way in hell.
Yeah, right. Although there might be some who do that because I think that is a real psychological.
The majority would say that would be a violation of my Hippocratic oath.
Right, exactly.
To do no harm. That's what. But for some reason, that rule doesn't apply when there's a child and they're indicating a desire to have their genitals permanently and thoroughly mutilated to such an extent that they will never be able to have children. And that for the rest of their life, they will be a patient of Big Pharma.
Exactly.
Because when you have, particularly bottom surgery done, and even when you just have the hormone treatments done, that unleashes a Pandora's box of medical problems that in many cases will last a lifetime. They're going to require medication. They're going to require further surgeries. They're going to routinely become infected. Yep. And so that benefits the bottom lines of major pharmaceutical companies like Moderna and Pfizer. These are common culprits. I think in our country and in the world today.
And maybe hospitals too.
Yeah, Boston Children's Hospital. They routinely perform gender transition treatments on minors.
Yeah, even though they said they didn't.
Yes.
They lie about that.
They're two-faced about it. And they also...
I think in Texas, too, that one guy came out. There was a whistleblower who said that, the Texas Children's Hospital, which I think is one of the biggest ones, they mmade a big story that they are not going to do gender reassignment, but behind the scenes they were doing it.
Yeah. Then we find out that in fact they are. We're told over and over again, oh, you crazy right-wingers, you're saying that bottom surgery is being done on minors. That's not true. We have, I think, around maybe a few hundred documented cases in this country so far, and that number is likely to grow soon, of minors who are as young as 15, 16, 17, having genital reassignment surgery done.
Well, let's see what happens in California, because there was that one teenager, and they removed her breasts here in California, and now she's suing Kaiser.
As she should.
As she should, yeah.
Yes.
It is funny because some of the stuff that we're talking about sounds so horrific and so unbelievable. And that's an easy thing to say, oh, that's not happening.
Right.
These right-wingers, they're crazy. That can't be happening. Yeah. And that's how they get away with it, because it's so crazy. You're told something that's so outlandish that people can't believe it. And they think we're crazy for saying so. Well, but indeed it is happening.
Well, and then what they do is they try to shut down and cancel people like Chloe Cole, who is detransitioning. She was transitioned at I think beginning when she was 13. and now she's detransitioning, and she knows for a fact that even though she's trying to reverse the process for the rest of her life, she will have serious medical problems as a result of chemical castration. Wow. So or the equivalent of chemical castration. So, we can, like you said, I think we can combat a lot of this through homeschooling. We can prevent.
When I was in home, I will say they do exist in the homeschool community. As I was towards the end of my homeschool journey, I did see a few trans people starting to come out in the homeschool community. I was pretty shocked by it, to tell you the truth. And this was maybe 8 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that. So it's been a while. But it was starting then. So the homeschool community, I mean, it's a lot better than being in a public school by a lot. But I guess my point is that there's no real safe place to go. The parents have to just, put the barriers up, know what's right, what's wrong.
Yes.
If your kid comes to you and says, I feel like a boy, even though she's a girl, you say, honey, this is going to pass. This too shall pass.
Yeah, and you obviously try to be understanding, and then try to I would try to ask him things like, do you feel that way all the time? Do you feel that way only some of the time? A little bit of the time? How intensely do you feel it? And I would say you're not bad, you're not dirty, there's nothing wrong with you. A lot of people go through this, and I would tell them, if you're feeling very distressed, we can take you to counseling.
That's scary because they're all in on this stuff. But
hopefully to a counselor who's a little more like Jordan Peterson.
Exactly.
And what we have to understand too is that there's a lot of comorbidities with this. Because a lot of times kids who are allegedly transgender, the majority have depression. And like we said before, around half have autism.
Autism, exactly.
So when people rush to transition these kids in these gender transition clinics, they're ignoring what the real problem is. The kid might not actually be trans. There could be an underlying issue. So if you give them treatments that are designed for people that are trans, you're treating the wrong condition. Which is disastrous.
Which is 99.9% of the time is probably what's happening.
Yes.
They are not treating the real thing.
Yes, absolutely. Because we know, what is it, 80% of the time when a minor manifests gender dysphoria, 80% of the time that goes away by the time they're in their mid-20s, right?
Yeah, something
Usually,
like that. Maybe even more than that. I don't know the number. But I will say, have you heard this story? There's a chemical, and I don't know what it is, but if you give it to frogs, or if frogs simmer in this chemical, boy frogs will become female frogs.
Well, it's
have you heard about that?
What it is that they develop. My understanding is they develop female sex characteristics that cause them to try to mate with other male frogs. They can do this.
So it turns them gay.
Sort of. That's how Alex Jones famously explained it. During his infamous rant. But that's one way of explaining.
And I'm wondering if we're not being, between the chemtrails and the food, we're inhaling this stuff, we're eating this stuff, we're drinking this stuff. I'm wondering, it's in the plastics.
Right, microplastics.
There might be a physical mechanism for this. I mean, there might be.
That could be a contributing factor. But I think most of it stems from what kids are being exposed to in school
so
and on
it's more
social
of a
media.
Psychological
and also
agenda
TikTok,
rather than
Instagram, because especially kids that follow people like Dylan Mulvaney.
Oh yeah.
They may start to idolize
absolutely
the lifestyle. As with being
actually he came out to be a pretty nice looking woman. Incredibly enough. Do
you notice what Dylan Mulvaney and other transgender activists will often do is he presents a caricature of what a woman is. He doesn't present how a normal, functional, sane woman would act. He presents himself
is over the top,
very extreme.
Extreme.
I'll be honest. I don't know a single woman that acts that way.
Right, exactly.
Not one.
I know.
So
it's true.
Honestly,
they're so dramatic, and when I
first saw his performances, I actually thought it was a comedy routine. And then I realized, oh no, for him it's actually serious. If it was a comedy routine, I wouldn't care because it's supposed to be a big joke.
Exactly.
It's like when Sacha Baron Cohen plays Bruno, who's a flamboyantly gay reporter. We know it's a joke, and he knows it's a joke. But I don't think Dylan.
And they're actually poking fun of it.
They are, but for Dylan Mulvaney, I don't think it's a joke.
No.
Which is, and then when minors see that, they're very impressionable. If they're already going through a bad time, they could say, hey, maybe this is the solution to my problems, when it's not. So it almost never is.
Never.
So, it's and that's why I really think that one of the things you have to do as a parent is, as hard as it might be to do, you really got to monitor who your kid is following on social media.
Yeah.
So that's incredibly important, because even if they're homeschooled, if they're immersed in this sort of social media, that may not do any good.
Exactly.
So,
but there are a lot of homeschooling options in LA.
Good.
Tons of resources, tons of groups. There's charter schools. There's co-op groups forming that have been formed for a long time.
Good.
There's tons of material. There's online learning. There's so much that
you happen to remember
do.
them? Could you list the names of some of the programs, just if you happen to remember them?
Well, some of the charter schools are Golden Valley Charter.
Golden Valley, okay.
Mountain View, I think, or Mountain
View.
Sky or something like this. There's some other ones I don't really remember, but there's a ton of them. You can, if you are in a charter school, you do get funds from the state to pay for classes or materials or things
vouchers?
like that. Well, what happens is you buy the material, so it's from vendors that are approved, and you buy the class or you buy the book or whatever it is, and then you get reimbursed.
Oh, okay, I see.
With cold hard cash, you get reimbursed.
Okay, excellent. So, which that's actually, in many cases, that's a good thing, because these parents have to pay taxes to support the public schools. So in effect, it's just them getting their tax money back.
Exactly.
So that's really all it is. So that's good.
So that's the positive. But if you are in a program like that, you do have to take the tests. You have to take the statewide test, because you are considered a child in the California public school.
The standardized
test.
test.
The standardized test.
Okay.
You have to do that.
Yeah.
But you're not in a school.
Right. Right, which these days, especially in places like California, is
important.
Probably for the best. But Bonnie, thank you so much for coming on with us today to talk about these critical topics, especially for parents raising young children and for parents raising adolescents. We really, this has been really enriching, and obviously, I think it's going to help a lot of people out there who are weathering this culture war storm. And with that, I'd also like to thank our audience for tuning into to today's episode of the California Proprietarian Podcast. We'll see you all again soon. And until next time, stay free and sic semper tyrannis.